Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 126 of Discourse in Magic with Karl Hein. This was a super cool episode because not only have I got a chance to produce a show that Karl Hein was in, but I also got a chance to watch him perform at the Magic Castle, and he is just an amazing performer and a really brilliant mind. So I think you're going to love this episode as much as I did. Here it is, episode 126 with Karl Hein. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Discourse in Magic. My name is Jonah.
My name is Tyler.
And we are here with a very special guest. Not only is this someone who I got a chance to produce his show in Toronto, or at least a part of it, but now I also got a chance to watch him perform at the castle, and his magic and his material and the stuff that he's come up with truly is diabolical, and we're super excited to jump in and talk about it. We are here with the Karl Hein. Karl, how are you?
Doing fantastic.
That is super good to hear, and we're excited to sit down and talk magic, talk theory, and hear a little bit of the in-depth details about how and why you do what you do. Let's start at the beginning. How did you get into magic? How did you start this thing?
I've been doing it since I was pretty young. I think probably around 8 years old. I think a fairly standard-ish, solid magician when I was a kid. I think at Sunday school, and just enjoyed it. Got started, I don't really remember the first magic I ever bought. I think I had a Disney book. Disney had a book they had where like Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck were, teaching tricks. I think I did every trick in that book at some point for my family. But I really remember really getting into it more seriously with a couple of things. One is I was in Atlanta with at a conference, and a friend of mine's.
Around what age?
I don't honestly remember. Probably between 8 and 12.
Okay.
And a friend of mine, my parents went to Magic Masters there and bought like a thumb tip, right? And showed me this trick. So I was like, I gotta go. So the next day I went, and I think I bought, this I do remember, it was a Shop Cup and Dominique Duvier's printing. like straight, like the first real tricks I ever bought at a magic shop were like those two tricks.
Awesome.
And so it was pretty good introduction to not, I kind of skipped all the basic stuff you see everybody does. Mm-hmm. And kind of got straight into that. And then I found my local magic shop, which really then got me to the local magic clubs. And then I think I really got into the sleight of hand when I started going to magic conventions. And my first magic convention, I met Lee Asher, obviously you guys know from up there in Toronto. He used to live down here in South Florida where I live. Mm-hmm. And then a couple other guys. And from there, it just kind of took off for the magic conventions and the magic club meetings and things like that.
Wow. Let's talk a little bit about the transition from there. So you hinted at, your interest in heavy sleight of hand and things like that came out of conventions. Let's talk a little bit about what the direction came from through there and a little bit about what the journey was. So you grew interested in magic. You bought some tricks. You started learning them. You started going to magic conventions. What told you that you should start actually spending a lot of your time on this, both professionally and just personally?
Well, when I was young and I was a kid, it was just fun. I came about magic, never really having magic idols or wanting to be on television. I didn't watch a lot of television as a kid, and I maybe saw a few David Copperfield things. But that's about it, really. So really my experience with magic came through just the problem solving, the creativity, just wanting to know more. It's like that magic junkie of trying to collect all the secrets,
Right.
Yeah, sure.
And, I remember, at some point when I started going to the magic clubs, there's a magic auction. I got a huge stack of magazines, Topps magazines and, magic magazines and genie magazines, and just going through those, looking at every single trick and all the advertisements and all that kind of stuff when I was a kid,
Mm-hmm.
I got started professionally. My first gig was my junior year in high school. And I got hired to do a project graduation by a friend of mine's father, who was graduating that next year. So he was a year older than me, and I got to do their project graduation. So I was a junior performing for the seniors, and that was my first paid magic gig. And I was fortunate in that when I was in college, I went to school fairly locally in South Florida here. And through college, a lot of my local magician friends that I met through the magic clubs and magic meetings and whatever would give me gigs, birthday parties, little restaurant gigs, here's an hour strolling walk around. And in the 4 years of college, just from the word of mouth from doing those referrals and the referrals from those, I was able to build a pretty good base. I was like, well, forget medical school. Let's try this for another year.
Right.
And it just kind of took off from there.
Right. So I have a super similar story in terms of the gigs that came in university were the cushion and the pillow to say, like, I can try this. I'm not ending school and then saying, like, let's do magic. But it was almost a real smooth transition.
Yeah, and I was lucky too. I didn't have the debt that a lot of students had. I had pretty good scholarships and all that. And so I was able to save a lot of that money. I was able to...
and what were you in school for?
I was pre-med, so I was biology, chemistry, but I was never really like wanting to be a doctor. It was more like I was just very good at all school things related.
Right. So that seemed like a good school thing to...
Yeah, it was like the best, the most advanced...
The best of the school things.
Yeah, the best that you could do at that specific school, pretty much.
Yeah.
And it was just never something that was... I did some research. I did some... worked in orthopedic research at a local hospital and published a paper and things like that. I just realized pretty quickly that it really wasn't something I really enjoyed doing. I was good at it, but I didn't really enjoy doing it. And the magic just, I think my senior in college, at some point I was like, wait a minute, I'm making more than my professors. I'm not even trying. And so I'm like, okay, maybe I'll try to give this a go. And it just kind of took off from there.
Yeah. It's super interesting, the different things that inspire us that potentially shouldn't. One of them for me is, you watch someone perform who sucks and you're like, if he can do it, like I can do it, right? So like exactly when the interesting moment is, you're like, it looks like I'm making more than my professor is, and I'm not even trying. So this seems like a good avenue. So that's a really cool moment. Let's talk a little bit more about. So from there, you were like, I really want to create amazing magic. Did you say I really want to perform on some of the world's best stages? Did you say I really want to make a living for myself as less stressful as possible? What was your approach at that moment to make magic work for you? Because I know that you've dabbled in creating and performing in different types of performing and different venue types and things like that. So what was the journey? What was the approach?
I think that for me, it was mostly just saying yes to the opportunities that came my way. Right. I never had specific goals. I want to be on TV or stage or anything like that. And honestly, I still don't. Like I'm not my goal is not to be in any sort of theater show or to be on television. It's never been something that I really care that much about. I've done television. I've done bigger stage shows because those opportunities presented themselves and it seemed like it was the right thing to do at the time. But it's not something that I've ever really aimed for or gone after. For me, it's mostly just been I enjoy the variety of entertainment that I do, and there's always a challenge of improving yourself, and also, of course, improving the number of gigs you're getting, and also the amount you're getting for them to better your business, as well as just to be the most successful and or to do the best that you can in any given situation. It's just problem solving in all those arenas.
That sounds like a very similar way that I think about the gig booking and the professionalism of this. So you mostly, when you started, you were like, how do I work on performing more and getting more gigs? You weren't really interested in creating magic because you created a ton of original or at least unique magic. Well,
I'm a little bit older, I guess. I'm 41. Then I guess, I think I maybe look a little younger than I am.
I thought you were 12.
I know. And so when I got into magic, this is in the late 90s, you didn't have, my first, the Einstein Shuffle was on VHS tape.
Wow.
So I'm
That's something that I did not know. That was a factoid that I did not know.
Yeah. So back then, being a magic creator was not a thing, right?
Right, yeah.
There's so few people doing that. It's not like today. In any way, right? You had people like Lee Asher, for example, that I knew that was putting out a lot of like little tiny lecture notes. That was fairly young.
Right. But it's crazy. It's like Lee Asher was a beast and he put out tens of lecture notes, right? Where like now there's people who are literally releasing magic daily, like
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it was a very different scene back then. And for me, I never like had the goal of creating my own magic. I didn't have the entertainer and the performance side background. I was more the science nerd background, if you want to say that. And so for me, the goal was never to create things. I just like performing magic. And I was constantly tweaking things to get better at it. People would give me suggestions. I would find my own, and slowly got better and better and better. I think that comes from really trying to have an accurate read of how people are perceiving you and how you're coming across, and realizing that you can always do better than that. And I think that's one of many magicians' problems, is they don't see exactly how their audience sees them. They're not present and aware of their audience. They're more performing at their audience than with their audience.
Yeah. I mean, what's awesome is that there's such a focal point for you in the journey here. It seems like the focal point is how to be a better performer and entertainer, and sort of the magic that's created out of it is just a result, you know? Like,
yeah. Yes and no. I think for me, when I was younger, I think in any business as well as performance career, your values and your motivations change over time, right? And so for a lot of young magicians, it is more about the focusing in on the magic itself, the trick itself, how it works, how visual it is, how cool it looks.
Right.
That made me feel this way. I want to then do that. I think there's a lot of that in the beginning, and it's a more what you would call talent based, like in the present, in the moment. It's you're just in your room playing with these random objects and these things and these ideas. You're not thinking about how can I make money off of this. You're not thinking about how do I become a better performer.
Yeah.
You're just playing with it. And so I think that's an early stage. And so for me, there's a big part of that where I was, how do I make this better? It was more focused on strong magic than it was as a good performer. And early on in particular, the strength of the magic I was doing, I was choosing better material. I was performing it in small, detailed ways that made it stronger. That I think that, and I was also doing stuff that was harder and then the other people therefore weren't doing. So the other people in the Magic Club weren't doing it because I couldn't do it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that comes across, I think, in certain ways. So I think, that's one of the things that David Blaine showed when his first special came out. He stripped away a lot of the entertainment value. There was entertainment there, but it's a different type of entertainment for that time. And it was just about the trick and the audience reaction to the trick, right? Or the magic, the moment that was being created there, the very Paul Harris style approach to that. And I think there's a lot to be said about the strength of just a simple magic effect is really strong. But now, where do you put that context? Where is that being thrown into? So I always tell in my lectures or when I talk to young magicians, there's always three things you have to keep in mind when you're choosing material and what you're going to do: who you are, who your audience is, and the venue you're performing for. And as any of those things change, it's really important that you change, right? So if you're doing, if you're getting hired by a corporate client to do something specific and achieve a specific goal, that David Blaine style of just look, watch might not be the right thing for that venue or for those people. Right. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. It's just that you're not putting that into the right venue. And so that's where, at some point when you're doing restaurants, when you're doing cocktail hour type of events and bar mitzvahs, where it's very, you have very short periods of time to make a very big impact, and you have to be entertaining, you have to be fun, you have to leave certain impressions, your magic changes because you have to be able to do more than just the trick. Right. And you have to be able to, especially if you're doing larger shows, you have to be able to present to a bigger audience. So as those venues change, you really have to put thought into your material and how you perform it.
Right, and the thoughts that come into play, and I'm starting to see this and explore this now, is so many of the decisions are not just what would be technically better in terms of the trick or the method, but so many of the decisions are like, what makes my stage look better? Or what will make this play for 500 instead of 50? What small changes can I make to this parlor act to make it play for more people? You know what I mean? Like a lot of the questions come down to staging and performance and not necessarily magic.
Of course, yeah. I mean, you're so much more influenced by the subconscious, the background information, than you are by the conscious upfront information.
And I love the anecdote that you shared about it's the performance. Like, what's the performance to you in terms of your character? What is it to the audience, and what is it to the location? Which I think is super important, because we see all the time kids magic in open mic shows, and we see people doing tricks for kids that don't involve that, or people doing comedy magic in a place that doesn't really involve it, and things of that nature. So focusing on that, I know for me, when I'm looking at magic, I'm always focused. The first thing is, who is this for? Like, who am I doing this for, and who's going to appreciate it?
Yeah, it's important to realize that there's not necessarily right and wrong answers, but there are right and wrong answers in certain situations, right? And if you have a specific goal, then there are right and wrong ways of achieving that goal.
Well, there are definitely wrong ways. There might be better and better right ways. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's definitely wrong ways, but even what's wrong for one person is right for somebody else.
Of course.
But again, it depends on what your focus is, and it depends on. And there's so many examples I've seen. I remember at one convention, there's a line. I don't remember exactly what it was, where this magician was making fun of this other magician on video. This really terrible line this guy was saying, and it was just a really bad way he presented this trick. And that same convention, I saw another magician do the exact same line and the exact same trick, and it just was perfect.
Right.
Because the way he came about it was a completely different angle, and he was a completely different personality. And it wasn't like, I'm so serious. It was, I'm being funny. And it was perfect. Right. And that applies across the board. And like what I was saying there with, like, who your audience is, who you are, and what venues you're performing in, who you are is, it's not just about character. It's about, are you doing the magic, or are you doing this for you? Are you doing this for your audience? Right. And there's two sides to that coin. It's the artist side of it is, I'm doing this because it's what I want to express. Right. I don't really care what the audience thinks. I want to express this through my magic. I enjoyed watching this trick. I want to show this trick. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. There's that side of it.
Exactly.
Right now. And that's fine, and that's great. The problem comes when there's a mismatch between what you want to express and the audience you're expressing it for.
Totally. Or even what you want to express and whether an audience cares remotely about that thing.
Well, this audience that cares about it, you just may not have found them yet.
Okay.
Right. And some magicians get lucky and they find their niche right off the bat. Right. Because, you can narrow, there's different ways you can approach those type of things. You can say, I want everyone and every audience to enjoy what I do. Or you can say, I don't give a crap. This is what I'm going to do. And you're going to find a very hardcore audience that loves that and is usually much bigger fans. Right. And some of the most successful people have a lot of people that hate them.
True.
Right. Like I think I heard you're talking about Nickelback, right? Mm-hmm. You said there's a whole bunch of people that love Nickelback.
Yeah,
for sure.
Right? We're not those people necessarily, but that contrast often can build and make you very successful. So but there's the other side of that is, in some environments, in some performances, it's not about what you are. If you're getting hired by a company, or you're getting hired by someone to entertain their guests, it's not about you and what you want to express. Then it's more about what you should be doing for that goal for somebody else, if you really want to do the best you can and make more money and to be able to give better value for your services, right? And so in many ways, it's more of a theatrical approach. If you're trying to do a theater show where people are paying tickets to come see you, like a Derek Dogadio, right? He has a lot more flexibility to say, this is what I want to express.
Right.
Versus if you're being hired to entertain.
Right. And even Derek will say he's not great at going into the corporate audience because that's not what he wants to do. And I think that in many ways, magic is very much more imbalanced towards the entertainment side and the audience focus side, and less so to the artist focus side. Right.
Totally.
And there has to be communication there. There has to still be, a connection with the audience, but I think it's much more towards what the artist wants to express on that side. But that, again, it depends on what you want to do, what your motivations are, and who you're performing for, and also what venues you're performing in, because that all changes things. If what you're doing is right or wrong, or as good as it could be.
I love that. And I think that that's a really great skeleton to just continue to look at things and say, like, what do I want and who am I and who's my audience and where am I performing? I want to touch back on one of the things you said earlier, which was near the beginning of your journey, you were just focused on doing strong magic. And that's what everyone's here for, really. Like, you're either listening to this podcast because you wish that your magic was better or you wish that you were being hired more, or both. So what was and is, aside from what you've told us already about the venue, the character, and the audience, but what is your approach or resources that you use or any advice that you have to help make magic stronger or better or more impactful or more entertaining?
I think that's a little bit of both of those things I was just talking about. So to some degree, you have to go out there and perform for a real audience, right? And you not only have to perform for a real audience, you have to be really and truly present and aware of how they're reacting to you. And you have to focus not just on the people that are smiling and laughing, but the people that are more reserved and more skeptical and more analytical.
Right.
And, one of the things that I hear oftentimes is, when you say, a magician maybe goes and performs at the Magic Castle or gives his excuse why he doesn't want to do some of these things. It's like, well, I perform for real people. The reality is magicians are real people too.
Right.
Yeah. And any audience, you're going to have people that are more skeptical, that are more analytical, that are less receptive to magic.
Right.
And those are the people that I always noticed in my audience that weren't reacting. And my goal then was to find ways of getting them to react, getting ways for them to enjoy and to engage and be involved in it. And sometimes those were magicians. And sometimes those magicians are, impressed by not the trick because I know the trick, but the way I executed it, or the difference in the way I executed it, or the difference in the way I presented it. Right? Or that it was a very unique and original thing. And even in your lay audiences, you're going to find people that have seen a lot of magic, and you're going to find people that haven't seen a lot of magic. Obviously the majority of people, maybe 90, 95%, you're probably the only magician they're going to see. But I don't want to just entertain that 90, 95%. I want to entertain and my goal is always to make sure everybody there is having a great time for most of my events. Right. And I think focusing in on that and like, how do I get that guy to react? What did I do? What was I not doing good enough to get that guy to react? Because I've been fortunate enough early in my career to see guys like Tom Mollica and David Williamson and Bill Malone. And they can walk into a room full of the most skeptical magicians or scientists or engineers and just actually have them amazed and fried and I think that's a really good goal to set. But you have to constantly be not focusing on the people that are reacting to you, that are the easy audiences. Like, again, the Magic Castle, you saw me there last week. That is one of the easiest audiences in the world to perform for.
Right.
Right? They're paying to come. They're going out of their way. They're getting dressed up. They're waiting in line to see magic. Right? That's the easiest possible audience you can perform for. Right? So if you're judging your reactions based upon that, you just haven't performed enough in a variety of environments.
Right. And magic, especially early on in magic, it lends to those easy environments compared to other art forms. How many times a singer must have had to go to not weird, but, open mic nights with 30 other singers and nobody really cares, versus a magician. Like, oftentimes your first gig was performing for people that was older than you, right, that were like, oh my God. So, and we see, and I know, as a kid, more often than not, it's easy to be like, I'm the magician, and that makes you look good. Over time, you start discovering the gigs that, it feels like you have to claw tooth and nail to get people to respect you or, to win over. Some shows, when you do them, you're like, it took me 3 minutes and then everyone was on my side for the remaining 50. And then some shows you're like, it took me 20 full minutes to get everybody on board.
Even remotely, yeah.
Exactly. So I totally feel that.
And I think it's also important to focus on that when you're young. And I say that because as you get older and you get either you're making more and you have now reputation amongst your clients, or maybe you have reputation amongst magicians or whatever that is, you can't always go back and perform in the streets without someone perceiving that maybe the wrong way. Right. But it's performing in streets and performing in kid shows and performing in these horrible environments that make you really, 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 really good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if you don't focus on a lot of that when you're young, when you all of a sudden have a name for yourself, and now you, in whatever way that is, and now you have a bit of an ego, and it's not just ego, it's you actually have something you have to protect if you want to continue to build that thing, right? It makes it much harder to keep working on it and improving your craft.
Right. You want to be better, quicker, right out the gate. And I love, a real takeaway from this for people to keep on top of their mind when they're performing. You want to know what to think about when you're performing. Think about winning over the people who aren't laughing. Like, that's a beautiful recipe to get better, is like the people whose arms are crossed or who are not entertained or who are on their phone. Those are your new targets, not to continue to whip up the people that are whipped, right?
Yeah.
Like,
there's a great podcast I listened to. I want to say it was either Joe Rogan or Tim Ferriss, but it was with Jamie Foxx.
Yeah,
and
Tim Ferriss probably.
It might have been Tim Ferriss's. It could have been Jamie Foxx's too. I could have been either one because I know he's done both. Yeah. But it really blew me away. Like whatever, I think it was the Tim Ferriss one. It was amazing, and one of the things he talked about was going into a variety of clubs and intentionally going in and bombing and doing this type of material for this type of audience and this type of material for that type of audience, and learning how to work over and to really win the crowd, whether it was an all black audience, an all white audience, an old audience, a young and hip audience, whatever that was, learning how to do that. And I think it's a super important thing. Again, it depends on what your goals are, right? But if you're looking to become a better performer all around and be more diverse, it's a really important thing to be able to do.
For sure.
I love that.
For sure. I mean, I think that, one of the biggest, normally we do this at the end, but I think one of the biggest takeaways that I've been, sort of picking up on this whole time is like, your intentionality is really what matters. Like, you can decide what is better or worse, and you don't have to listen to someone telling you like, no, you need to be able to perform kids' birthday parties before you're able to perform like a stand-up parlor show or something like that. You can craft your own career. That's one of the beauties of the art.
I think your intention is important. I think to some degree you can't care about what other people think, but at the same time, it's very important to be aware about what other people are thinking.
Of course.
And the consequences of that for whatever you're intending. And also realizing that your intentions will change over time and being open to that, because as you mature, as you age, as you enter different phases of life, your intentions will change, and not getting stuck and putting yourself in a position where you're going to get stuck in one certain type of thing when you may have missed the boat on something else that could have taken you much farther. I think we're all guilty of that, myself incled. Like, I think you have to, your life is always evolving, and so should your magic, so should your art form as well.
There's a notion in a book that I love called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's hundreds of millions of copies or whatever. But in it, one of the habits, the final habit, is called sharpening the saw. And the idea is scheduling for yourself, whatever it is, every 6 months, every year, every 2 years, every 5 years, whatever it is, to look at the goals that you've been approaching and look at the things you've been trying to accomplish and see if that's still correct and see if that still aligns with you. And I love the idea that sort of those two mentalities are different. The question of what do I really want? And then you sort of write it down, you set it up, and then that's what you work towards for as long as it is until comes your refresh period where you get to look at that list and say, are these all the things that I still really want? So I love the idea of saying, like, figure out what you want, execute on it, and then, don't be afraid to realize that thing that you may have wanted may change. It may change after you have accomplished it. Exactly. It may even change before. You might be like, I always joke the hardest job in the world is an astronaut, because you spend your whole life being like, I want to be an astronaut. And then the first time you try it, you're already an astronaut.
Yep.
Like you went through the whole thing. At least for us, like, we get to be like, I want to be a magician. And then we go do a kid's show and we're like, not that, right? or we say, I don't know yet. That didn't seem fun, but I think I have to do it a few more times to see if I really can get enjoyment, or whatever the case may be, right? So just the idea of keeping open to the potential that you might not want something that you want now, or want something that you don't want now, is a really important thing to keep your mind open to in the development of your magic. And I love that.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on the problem, or rather just the discussion on creativity and originality, particularly? And I want to hear your thoughts, and then I want to sort of introduce a person, and the person I'll introduce is called, like, like newbie Nathaniel, and newbie Nathaniel really wants to start performing, but I think that it would hold newbie Nathaniel back way too much to wait till he's got everything original. So what are your thoughts in general about it? And then what's your thoughts for newbie Nathaniel? What should he do?
Again, this all comes back to the three things I was saying earlier, right? A lot of times magicians get compared to other art forms, but the reality is magic is different than other art forms. And in that way, it's not just in the obvious ways, it's also in ways like how does creativity involved into magic? Because other art forms, let's say comedy, for example, the main venue for comedians is comedy clubs. Right? And in comedy clubs, there's this emphasis, there's a culture around being original, 100% original from the get-go. That same culture does not exist in the magic world. And even in comedy, if you are doing corporate events during comedy, that culture doesn't exist there either.
Right.
Right? Because in corporate comedy, it's about entertaining and about being clean and about being non-offensive. And it's a whole different set of what the goal is versus a comedy club. And so in magic, there's a much broader base than some of these other fields in terms of, as a magician, you can go be a birthday party magician. Do you need to be original to be a birthday party magician? Do you need to be super creative to be a birthday party magician? No, you don't need to be. You're not hired to be original or creative. You're there to entertain that audience.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you for yourself shouldn't have that goal to do that and to be better and to constantly making yourself more unique, because the more unique you are, the more impact you can make. Absolutely, the more successful you're going to be, the better you're going to feel for yourself, right? But again, that's not necessarily the goal of that specific venue, right?
Right.
Okay. And so, yes, there is an importance to creativity, but the other side of it is, so much of what all magicians do is based upon people before them.
Right.
All right. And same thing with comedians and musicians and everybody else, is recognizing a huge part of what you do, no matter how original or creative you are, it's still a huge part of that base is not you, it's other people. Right. Mm-hmm. And to the degree, of course, of what you can, there's the classic line is, you steal from one person or you steal for 10 people. There's a big difference. Right.
Right.
One's stealing, one's doing research. Right. And
one's stealing, one's inspiration.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's important. So that as much as you can diversify your,
thievery.
Well, not just thievery, but just your influences, right? Your influences. Yeah. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, you take a little bit from here, a little bit from that, and you're always trying to put a little bit of yourself into that, right? And if you continue to do that, you're going to get, it's just like anything else. It's a skill you practice, and then that skill gets better and better and better. And it becomes much easier for you to have your own point of view and to actually do things. And I think that the problem that I see nowadays is not so much the lack of creativity in young people. It's more the pressure in many ways for them to be creative, and then also the pressure for them to teach and to lecture.
So we'll talk about that. So we'll talk about that in a minute. First of all, I love what you're saying about creativity, which is first and foremost, like how important how important is creativity to the magic that you want to do for whoever the person is that's asking themselves this, right? So like, are you trying to perform on the biggest stages in the world? Yeah, you'll probably have to be doing some things that other people aren't doing.
Absolutely. If you're trying to do magic on television, I mean, there's such an important thing that has to be doing original material, or at least seem that way, right?
Exactly. And then it's like, or are you trying to do walk around magic at some restaurants? It's like, oh, you can literally do anything. And not only is it not a problem, but like, go do someone else's trick. Hopefully when you do it 300 times, you'll come up with some brilliant lines of patter or a different move or, and I'm very encouraging to people. Like if someone published a trick and you bought it, do it. Like do it so much that you have something valuable to add to it because of the experience that you've put into it.
That's absolutely right. But so one of the things to keep in mind is this though, right? So let's just say restaurants, right? So say you're a new young performer and you're performing in restaurants and you're just doing standard stock material that you go to the magic shop or you go to a lecture and you're doing the material and it's someone else's material, someone else's lines, but you're doing it competently and you're doing a great job. As we talked about before, 95% of your audience is going to be, this is probably their only or one of the few experiences they have with close-up magic, and you're probably going to be one of the best magicians they've ever seen live, right? But generally speaking, the people that actually get you the gigs and make the contacts that are the influencers generally have much more experience, much more influence. So let's say this is happening in my local area and I'm one of the people eating in that restaurant by chance, right? And that magician comes up to me and performs at my table, not knowing who I am, right?
Right.
I'm not going to look at him and be like, I'm just going to be like, okay, that was just a good magician. But if that same magician had put the time and effort into being more creative, being more original, to, again, paying attention to that 5% of the audience that's not reacting, or 10% of the audience that's not as engaged, and now engaged me and made me go, wow, this guy's really good, I'm much more likely to say, hey, here's some tips. Here's some business opportunities for you. Here's how I can help you out. Right? And it's not just me as a magician, it's me as a CEO, or me as whatever else it would be, that as an opportunity to help you out. You have so, as you get closer to the extremes in any specific situation, that's where the real action happens, right? And so it is really important to do, but you have to realize that's not the only focus. I mean, obviously your goal is to entertain that 90% in a restaurant, right? That's what the restaurant owner cares about. But you're balancing what you want as a performer and what your audience wants as well. And you have to kind of find that balance that's right for you.
Right. So, I mean, you mentioned that there's a lot of stress on young people to be creative and to be original, and, you know, that it's not that important. But, you know, you've also made it clear that it is still a currency of what we do in terms of simply respect or friendship or whatever, or advice from fellow magicians who want to see that you're doing something special. And also, it's also valuable for maybe bookers or people who have seen more. And then, of course, valuable for you so that you feel like at the end of the day, you couldn't be replaced by a robot version of you who does it better.
That's
or just
right.
like a really, really pretty actor. You know, the one thing that keeps me creating is the thought that like a good looking actor might be able to do a big, huge chunk of my act, probably better than me. If he sits down with a speaking coach and whatever, like a team of people could figure out how to get one guy to make my act look way better than it does. You know what I mean? So like the thought that I can be replaced by somebody is what keeps me creating. And I like that there's sort of three prongs there to creating. It's for the respect of the magician, for potentially the small difference that it makes in bookers and the small difference it makes in those 5% of people. And then as well to satisfy the inner piece of you who wants
to. Because in the end, if you're having fun and you're doing what you love, that shows too. That's a big part of it, right?
Right.
There's going to be something in you that's different. You're not just going through the motions if you're doing something you really enjoy doing. And I think there's an argument that could be made. There's many different ways you can make different arguments, but there's an argument that could be made that, you know, one of the purposes or the basis of life is creation. Whether you come about that from a religious standpoint or from an evolutionary standpoint of reproduction, right? Just the creation of new life is an important thing. And that's what you're doing when you're creating things. You're creating something new. It's an act of creation, right? And there's not too many things that you have in your life when you create something that you feel is really came from you and is different from all the other things you've seen out there, and you've created something new in the world, and now other people are doing that and seeing it, the value in it. That's a drug, man, right? It's a really, really cool thing. And I think it's important to encourage that. But it's also important to realize that there's different approaches and ways of getting there. And for me, it's more problem solving. For someone else, it's more having an idea of what you want and a vision for something that you can see. There's different ways of getting there. It's something that needs to be encouraged, but I think you have to be careful not to beat yourself over if you're not doing it yet.
Right.
There's more to it than just that, you know?
So let's talk about that, because there's sort of a longing in magic for young magicians, but I don't think it's current. I think it goes back many years, but there's a longing, you know, because magicians learn from other magicians, and the bulk of, like, I've seen more magic lectures than I have magic shows. So when we think about who we look up to in magic, what tends to happen is we're looking up to these brilliant creators, and, you know, you dream one day, these young magicians are dreaming of lecturing one day, or, you know, they're like dreaming of having their own Murphy's lecture or whatever, something like that. Their dreams are to have amazing magic for other magicians, and then what you have is what you're saying, which is maybe people lecturing or writing lecture notes before they should. And, it's always a back and forth, because part of me says the more people that are creating stuff, the better and faster creation happens. Like, we can't deny how fast things are moving. Then the other part of me says it really, really clouds the market up with crap. And there's just a lot of stuff out there which is nonsense or mild variations of things that have no business existing. And like, it's the reason why I haven't published things. It's not that I don't have anything valuable. I've got tons of valuable, but they're just additions. And I'm like, does the world really need Jonah Babbins's lecture notes with twists? Does the world really need that? So when I think the world needs it, I'll write it, but I don't think the world needs it yet. So that problem of people making too much or making not enough, what's your thoughts on it?
Well, like you just said, there's pros and cons to it, right? I would say that it is a relatively, from my perspective at least, it's a relatively new thing. I think that there's so much more information now. The cycle of turning out products is now a weekly thing versus a monthly or a yearly or every other year thing, right? Again, when I was young in the days of VHS tapes, you didn't have this. You only could see lectures really, maybe on a video, but those videos came out far and few between.
Right.
You could go to a Magic Club lecture, but there were far few people lecturing. So that was maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Right. There weren't nearly as many Magic conventions as there are now. So all those things you're saying about, sometimes people see more lectures now than shows is absolutely true. But I mean, you can just go online and watch how many lectures on Penguin and Murphy's right now. Right. Totally. Okay. So there's a wealth and a big part of that. And I think you just had Joshua J on. He was saying that, some of these guys would benefit from doing less, just like most Magic shows at Magic conventions would be so much better if they were half as long.
Right.
Okay. Because you focus on what is really, really, really good and really, really tried and true. And there's, I think, multiple problems. When I have a very young person, when I say very young, I mean like in their teens or early 20s, there are very few people that are really so far ahead of their time and super geniuses and that really grasp it, that have something to say that's really valuable at that age. Not to say that they don't have creations or ideas. There's absolutely ideas that are amazing and that are hot and they're like, wow, that's so cool, that's so new, it's so visual, and blah, 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 right? But there's a big difference between that and seeing the whole picture to realize what you should be, if you should be saying something, because you don't really have the right point of view and the full perspective to be able to say it. And I published some stuff when I was fairly youngish, but not a lot. And I look back on that and I go, well, I certainly would have done a lot of that differently. I'm kind of embarrassed by that. You asked Joshua J about his book he published when he was a teenager, right? There's some great material in there, but trust me, he wished he would have done things differently. And it's just because when you're young, you have a completely different perspective on things and you're going to be embarrassed by things you did. But that's permanent. It's on video. It's in book format. It's whatever it is. It's out there. It is a record of that. You can't take that back.
One of the things that's so similar about what you're saying is it reminds me of TV. What we would bring on a lot of magicians who had been on things like America's Got Talent or things of that nature. And one of the thoughts is like, you can never undo your first time on TV. Like you can be too ready, but you can never, like if you're like, you know what, I probably shouldn't be on Fool Us, but fuck it, I'll do. You know what I mean? Like you can never undo that video. Like you can never go back. So it's the same thing with your first book. You can never unpublish your first book. You can never unpublish your first video. And like us, we can't unpublish our first podcast episode, right? So
and here's the basic thing I'll say to that. The very basic thing to get the point across is that I tell these people, like, when you're like 20 years old or 15 years old or 25 years old, I say, in 5 years, do you plan on being a better magician? Do you plan on having this material be better? Will this material improve in 5 years? And the answer is no. Well, that's a whole different problem.
Right.
But if the answer is yes, then I have to ask them, well, if 5 or 10 years from now, looking back, are you going to be happy that you published this now versus waiting to get it done down the road?
Right.
Okay. Now, so that is, I think, ideally how it should be done. However, there's a big problem. And that big problem is there's a huge push from some big businesses to get every idea out as soon as it comes out.
Right.
And if you don't act now, you're going to miss the boat.
Right.
Because as soon as someone else gets it, there's not that ethic where all of a sudden someone else has a variation of the thing that you haven't published yet, and now they publish that variation, and now you've missed your window, right? And you're not getting the credit, and you're not getting the money for it.
Right.
Right. So it's hard to give people advice on that because there is a pro and there's a con to it. Right. Mm-hmm. And again, that comes down to what your intention is, what your motivation. Why are you doing what you're doing? Are you putting out material, creating material because you want to sell it to other magicians? Are you doing that because you want to, have a documentation of your creations? Are you doing it because you want fame and respect from your peers? There's different reasons for doing it.
That's such a big point here, which is like, if you're in it for the money of a bestseller, I promise you'll make more money performing than you will selling your trick.
Well, not necessarily. I mean,
if you have a bestseller, then not necessarily. But I don't think that's coming out from anybody with no name and no, you know what I mean? Like if you're in this to make a lot of money, then you're going to be in the creating world for many more years because you can't do that off the bat. If you're in it because you want proof that you came up with it first, then just, I guess, go to town and start publishing, right? If you want, it depends. If you want it to be good, then maybe give it some more time, right? And it depends on what you're in it for.
That's the other side of it too, is that if you start putting out creative magic when you're young, and I've seen this happen with a lot of magicians, it starts to really narrow what your focus is. And and that focus usually then gets away from actually performing in the real world and in real world environments. And I've seen that happen with quite a few guys, and the really good ones you see get funneled into some pretty niche markets like consulting, for example, and or some of them end up working for the major magic companies, for example, right? And their performances often suffer from that, especially when they start going out and they make a big splash on something like Penn and Teller or AGT or whatever it is, and then they start getting actual requests to perform in the real world on big stages and for real people and real environments with the specific needs they're trying to meet, right? They fail, and I think that that's not always. Again, it all depends. There's no right or wrong to it. It depends on what your intention is and where they're going with it. There's not really a right answer to it, but I think there needs to be, to some degree, some more accountability. I don't know exactly where you put that accountability though, right? That's the problem. It's difficult. And there is a big pull from the Murphys and the Penguins and someone like Vanishing Ink even, but we talk about like Andy and Josh, they have a bit more, they curate what they do to a much bigger degree, right? They have much higher standards about what they're going to put out. And some of the smaller boutique shops are more like that. But the bigger ones, they need something new to push every week. That's just their business model that's developed. They need something new to push every week. And sometimes people get caught up in that machine.
Right. And hopefully conversations like this, and we've had countless people come on and say things like this, conversations like this are the opposing voice that helps someone wait another 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years to release that thing. And hopefully it's a voice in that direction. And obviously what you said is true, where there's pros and cons. But if our goal is to reduce the amount of crap out there and also make everybody who publishes anything ever look good for doing it and not look bad for doing it, then we want to make it as good as possible. And that's the advice that we can pass on here, which is spend more time on it, work longer on it, and don't be wooed by the big names.
If I look at most of the things that I've put out, most of those things have at least 10 to 15, some of them 20 years behind them before I publish them. And that's a lot of time to make small changes and to make little details. And it's the little details that often make the biggest difference, And there's some things I had to put out. There's a couple things I had to put out because I would have rather waited 5 or 10 years, but I knew if I didn't do it now, I would have missed my window.
Right.
Right.
So let's talk. There's one thing specific that you do that I want to talk about just because it's a hot conversation topic, which is Rubik's Cube magic. Mm-hmm. And I know that you were one of the OGs in Rubik's Cube Magic, and also I've seen your Rubik's Cube Magic, and it's fantastic. It's really, really, some of the best things I've ever seen anybody do with a Rubik's Cube. Never mind the people who solve it in 7 seconds, not magic. Just the stuff that you do is pretty cool. But we're seeing Rubik's Cubes everywhere. And one of the notions that you just brought up is people are starting to see magic. They're seeing magic maybe on Fool Us, maybe on America's Got Talent. And now people have really seen Rubik's Cubes. And the idea of I can solve it blindfolded or I can match it is something that I'm sure you've seen people say, oh, I saw somebody do that on America's Got Talent, or oh, I saw somebody. And now we're dealing with, and this is just, I'm just using a Rubik's Cube as a scapegoat, but we're dealing with this problem of not exposure to secrets, but exposure to magic. Mm-hmm. So do you think that the idea that a prop can be overused or overexposed in magic so much so that people feel like, oh, I saw somebody do that? Cards, I don't know if it plays the same role or not, because some people obviously feel that all card tricks are the same, some lay people, and then some people love to see a show that's all card magic and they don't care. So what are your thoughts? Do you think something like a Rubik's Cube could go out of style and be overused, or do you think it can just be welcomed into magic as a new prop and tool that people use, like cards and coins and wands?
Yeah. Well, take a step back and say, like you said with cards, it's a very common thing amongst magicians as well as amongst even many lay people that, oh, it's a card trick. Yeah. But then Bill Malone walks into the room, or David Williamson walks into the room, and you don't give a crap that he just did 2 hours of card tricks. Right. Because that's not what it's about, right? So the same thing can be said really for any prop, right? Or any concept of magic where you say, oh yeah, I know this whole thing. And then you can be completely blown away or completely surprised by something someone else did that's different or unique or creative in a different way. Right. So I think to make a blanket statement of like, oh, I don't use cards, or I don't do this, it is maybe going up the wrong path. There's exceptions to that. And there's certain characters of people that it doesn't fit their character to use Rubik's Cube or to use a card, to use playing cards, right? That goes back to who your character is, who you are as a performer, or maybe the venues you're performing in, right? Or the audiences you're performing for. There's certain things you shouldn't do in those situations. Getting back to Rubik's Cube specifically, so I was one of the original guys doing magic with real Rubik's Cubes. It was pretty much me and I think George Tate and Garrett Thomas to some degree. He was technically not using real Rubik's Cubes, which is a really cool thing. I think that makes him really unique with that, but it was using it in the way that you would use a real Rubik's Cube. And that was, there weren't, I mean, it really was me and Garrett that were performing maybe at magic conventions with real Rubik's Cubes. So I can't think of anybody else. And I was probably doing that for about 5 or 6 years at I never done a lot of conventions. So I wasn't doing a lot of conventions, but I was doing some. So what I realized is that, in the early days of when I say early days of this new wave in the early 2000s, people would be like, oh yeah, Garrett was like, oh yeah, I came up with this idea of matching the cube, right? And so I didn't do the matching the cube for a long time because I thought it was like, I'll let Garrett handle that, right?
Right.
What I found out is almost all that stuff was invented in the 1980s. And the very first Rubik's Cube competition was, I believe, in 1982 or 1983, where they had a competition and found the world record for who could solve the Rubik's Cube. Take a guess as to when the next Rubik's Cube competition was.
The next year,
yeah.
Not until 2003.
Whoa.
Really?
There's about a 20-year gap, which pretty much corresponded to the internet coming into play and corresponded to newer speed cubes coming into play, which also then corresponded to the similar things happening in magic, right?
Right.
So in the early 80s, it was a huge fad. Everybody was publishing different things on Rubik's Cubes in magazines and all kinds of stuff. And they weren't magicians, yeah. All this stuff was a huge fad then, right? Now, nowadays, though, it's not as likely to be a fad because this has been going on now since the early 2000s, right? And I say that not just in the magic world, but outside the magic world as well, right? Because of the way the internet has changed things, people can compare scores, people can develop communities online and then offline, which is what happened with Rubik's Cubes. People developed online communities, and then this online community says, let's get together, let's compete, let's see who really can do what they say they can do, right? And then that developed into the Rubik's Cube community. Right. And similar things have happened in magic. with the internet and communities developing and things like that, right? So you're absolutely right. Like, I mean, having performed Rubik's Cube magic way before it was a popular thing to do.
Like, the amount of it now is so skewed compared to the number of people in the world that care about Rubik's Cube.
Yeah, for sure. But the thing about Rubik's Cubes, though, is that everybody knows what it is. Everybody has one. Right. It is the most sold toy, yeah?
It's sort of like it's like an innate puzzle. Like, it's a self-holding, you know what I mean? Like, it's iconic.
Yeah,
for sure.
So you escape a lot of the strangeness. Like, if everybody was doing magic with carrots right now, it would be a little bit stranger than if it was, an iconic puzzle. So it's not terrible, but it is definitely, there's a lot of it.
It's an iconic puzzle that everybody can relate to in the same way they relate to cards. The problem with Rubik's Cubes is there's only so many magical effects that you can do with it.
Right.
And people are finding some more here and there, but it's not, then at some point you're pretty much just using a Rubik's Cube when you could use something else to do the same thing. So the basic effects of quick solve, the matching, predicting a match, things like that, the average, a lot of people now, I've seen it from AGT and from television appearances and from other magicians performing and so forth. So the surprise level is not there the same way. So then it comes down to how good of a performer you are. And that's not always a bad thing, right? It separates the men from the boys in a way, right?
Right.
So it hasn't really affected me. In some ways it has, because like certain things, like when I do like the matching effect and certain ways I present it, the audience never used to see that coming, but now they see it coming a mile away. And you'll hear people say, oh, it's going to match.
It's going to match.
Yeah.
You're like, damn it.
Right. But that doesn't, in some ways that's good. Some ways that's bad. It depends on what you're looking for. You still get though that wave of realization of what's happening if you do it the right way. Right. I think did you see me do that when I was at the castle?
Yeah, I've seen you do it a few times at the castle in
Toronto. Yeah, so you've seen like the reaction it gets, right?
Yeah.
So, and even when someone says that, it still gets that reaction. Yeah. So it's not necessarily bad. It's just that you have to be a good. It's
just raises the bar needs to be raised now that it's more common.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of room for it. I think the problem with Rubik's Cube magic is at some point things start to get better and better and better, and at some point they start to then level off and or go down. And you'll start to see people now, especially because of this emphasis on being creative and having your own tweak on things, you start seeing people develop things that are less good than the original or go in a worse direction than the original. And I think I've started to see a good amount of that.
And we see that happen in card magic for many years, and now we're just starting to see it happen in Rubik's.
Yeah, and then you also go to the other phase of that where it's no longer like, for me, it started off as being like, this is a gimmick Rubik's Cube. Let me make it out of a real Rubik's Cube. And now it's gone back to let's gimmick up the Rubik's Cubes. And there's pros and cons to gimmicks as always. So it's not like there's all bad to it, but again, it depends on the venues you're performing in and where you perform. If you're doing close up, you have to be very careful with gimmicks of that nature, on stage, it's a whole different animal.
Love it. Okay, so we're getting towards the end of the episode where we have some rapid fire wrap up questions to ask to hear some of your opinions on the world and magic and everything there. So I will start with one, which is your magical PSA. So you have an opportunity to tell all the magicians of the world something, a word of warning, a word of caution, advice. We've had everything from be yourself to stop doing banana bandana. What is it that you would like to tell all the magicians of the world?
Start doing vanishing bandana. Now, it may seem like a joke, but it's actually, I think, kind of true. And when I say that, I mean not so much professional magicians. I mean more young magicians.
Right.
Now, that's a trick I did when I was young. I did it for a lot of family shows, a lot of school shows, even for adult shows. And I know several magicians, quite a few good magicians that also used to do that. Now, this is going back again to the original. Not the original, but the original one that came out when it was re-released and made popular on the cassette tape, when cassette tapes were a thing, okay? Yeah. When you could actually pull out a cassette tape or put it in a cassette tape and play it, right? So obviously, I'm sure you've already talked about all the bad things about what the vanishing bandana is. What are the good things about what the vanishing bandana routine is?
Well, I think the number one good thing is if you're having trouble going on stage and doing magic, you can go on stage and do that trick.
That's one of the very good things. What does it teach you in that process?
Surprise! It teaches you comedy. It teaches you a bunch of things.
It teaches, as a new performer, it can teach you a whole lot of things about what something very silly and basic you can get out of a simple prop like that, right?
Right.
Now, again, if you're, it depends on all those things. But if you're, and now I think it's kind of gone past its way because it's not the same as it used to be in many venues. If you're doing cruise ships, you should not be doing that because everybody was doing it, and it's not if you're at that level, you should be doing your own original stuff, right? If you're a professional performing magician, you should be doing your own original stuff, okay? And you should stop doing it. You should have never been doing it to begin with, at least not at that level. Right?
Yeah.
100%. Right. But when you're new into performing and you're trying to put together a family show or a kid show or something along those lines, having an act where you don't have to talk, where you can just sit there and watch the audience and you can sit there and play with, how does just this little smile change how the audience reacts to what I'm doing?
Right.
Right. How does this little thing that I'm doing with my eyes change how the audience reacts to that laugh?
Yeah, it's cool. The same way that a trick that requires no difficult sleight of hand allows you to focus on your audience and your patter. A trick that requires no sleight of hand and no talking allows you to focus on your facial expressions and your body language.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
And those are very important skills to learn when you're very young and new to magic. And on top of that, you may not realize, but when you're pretty new, that's probably going to be the best trick in your whole show.
For sure.
And one of the other things that people don't realize is that you think you're doing a good job until all of a sudden you've done something that then goes, oh, that was a way better reaction than I've ever gotten before. Right. Or until you see someone perform, you go, oh my God, I thought I was killing. They are killing. Right.
And you realize how much comes down to like a little facial expression or something.
Exactly.
Like that.
And so I think starting off some of those classic routines are classics for a reason. And that's why oftentimes beginners are encouraged to use those classic routines, right? But there's a period of time you need to do that for, and then you need to move on, right?
They are training wheels of sorts.
Exactly. And as with everything, like I say, you always have to kind of look at the pros and the cons. And there's obviously a lot of cons to that trick, especially for certain people and certain things, but there's also a lot of pros to it. And it's one of those tricks that I remember when I was doing it, I was surprised because, at some point, you come back to the same school every year, right? And they've seen the kids, half the kids have seen this trick before. Either you do it or someone else has done it, right? And they know what's going to happen. And those kids are always the ones laughing the hardest.
Right.
Because it's not just about what we're just talking about. It's also about how do you structure a routine or an act. There is some really smart structuring in that routine.
Okay, yeah, no, it's true.
Right?
It's kind of like the fact that
because there's conflict, there's the magician in trouble.
Yeah,
and then you get saved. That's the stereotypical archetypal story.
Yeah, it's like when you buy your packet tricks from the magic store or whatever, like you don't always immediately start doing your own pattern when you're first learning. You just read the instructions and then learn what the intention was from the creator of that trick. And then you learn how to, find your own intentions and use the same tools that you're learning there.
And if it's not a trick that you do, it's at least a trick that's worth studying as to why have so many people done this trick? Why is it so well received by audiences? Right. What about it is so good that so many people want to do it and copy it, even way past the point when everybody's doing it and now it's terrible because everybody's doing it, which I think is probably leveled off to some degree. I don't know how much it's being done now. Maybe it's still a huge thing. There was certainly a certain point, quite a few years ago where everybody was doing it, and it was just crazy, right?
I think it's more of a placeholder, as being referred to as what it, you know what I mean? Like for this conversation, it's sort of a placeholder to any sort of classic overused thing. And I love,
but there's all sorts of, there's another little thing about, like, it was just again, speaking from my experience, I remember when I was young and when I first started doing it, it taught me something else that's, again, you probably would never think about, is it taught me how to modify and make things repeatable. Because when you put a banana in there, it gets all messy and you can't use it anymore. And
so you got to shove a plastic bag in.
Yeah, but the plastic bags really wouldn't work super well because they were super quickly. Then I found my balloon bag. My balloon bag, I cut it just right. It fit perfectly. And it was a hands-on. I was building modifying that trick in a small, meaningless way. But it's not meaningless because that's one little step that then leads you to then be creative in other ways, right?
And like we were saying earlier, sometimes a lot of the changes aren't what's a better change in the method, but how does this work better on stage? How can I make this repeatable? How is it not messy? And things like that. So I love that. What an interesting twist on advice to do banana bandana. Tyler, do you have the next question?
So our next question is kind of similar to the magical PSA. It's the question of the week. Basically, you're going to ask our audience a question. It can be something that you want to know the answer to, like why are they doing this or what do they think of that? Or it can be something introspective for them to sort of focus in on themselves and ask themselves. But what question do you think our audience needs to be asked, either by you, by us, or by themselves?
Oh, man, I guess there's so many, I guess, right? For me, I think like for magicians, this is kind of a little bit deep, I guess, but how close does your model of reality of any specific situation actually match the reality of that situation? And that's kind of another way of saying like how aware are you of that, of how your audience is perceiving you? And then the second follow-up question, I think is more important, is how do you figure out how to test that?
Right.
How do you test that, and then how do you actually?
How do you take action? Yeah. How do you notice it and have actionable steps that you can follow?
And I love, the thought there that one of the secrets to performing is, being present and understanding what your audience is liking and not liking and changing to it. One of the most important things is to make sure that we're not looking through rose-colored glasses about how we're being seen, either rose-colored glasses or shit-colored glasses.
Right.
Like we get off stage and we're like, that was awful. Mm-hmm. And if you're horribly wrong, then that's not doing you any justice either, because you're not learning how to get better. And if you get off stage and you're like, I'm the best, then that's also not doing you anything good, because you're not giving yourself, you're also looking through skewed glasses. So I love that idea, which is how accurate is your representation of how accurate is,
and that applies to everything in life, right? It was like, is your model of what actually is going on close to what is actually going on?
How right are you?
How
wrong are you?
And that's what science is. Science is then how do I actually test that? How do I actually figure that out in a way that actually is concrete? Yeah. And I see so many magicians. Look, I just was at FISM in Korea, right? And you go to the magic competition there. And you watch the close-up magic competition. I watched most of the close-up in the parlor. I think I watched all the close-up in the parlor. And I could really only remember, of all those acts, maybe one or two that actually engaged the audience.
Right.
Out of dozens and dozens of acts. That magic competition, at least in that degree, is going towards a more theatrical close-up style of, I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to do stuff and you're going to watch it. And you're going to react to it, but you're just going to watch it. I'm not acknowledging in so many ways that you're there. I'm just doing what I'm doing.
This is just like I do for my mirror, except there's you guys
exactly.
Too.
And just like I do it for my video camera, I'm doing it for you now. Yeah. And there's a place in magic for that. I'm not saying that's bad or that's wrong or that's not good. I'm just saying that it's become very skewed, at least in that aspect of magic conventions and magic competitions, to that side of things. And I think that's not necessarily a good thing for the overall thing. I think it needs to be a little more balance in the force there.
I agree. I've always found the bulk of FISM presentation magic to be not equal in terms of not talent or anything, but just in terms of like presentation style. Every time I go see magic, no one's silently dancing to music. But when you go to FISM, everyone's silently dancing.
Right, and being present is super important, because everybody wants the best shows you ever go to are always the shows that you feel like it was a one-time thing that will never happen again. You'll never be able to see that again. Right, and also when you mention, if you just make a comment, just one comment to someone about the way their facial expression is, that they're not as engaged as they should be, or about them being on their phone, whatever positive or negative way you're doing, everybody in that room immediately knows that you're aware of them. This isn't.
Yeah, you're not. They know it's not Netflix.
Exactly.
You're actually
there. And now they pay more attention because they don't want to be called out. They don't want to be engaged, or they do want to be engaged in that positive way, right? And so it makes a huge difference.
Who as one person to recommend to be on the podcast, with the only caveat being you have to be able to get us in contact with them, who would you recommend for this podcast? Who do you think we absolutely must have?
There's a lot, I'm sure. I don't know who all you've had on. Maybe Cody Fisher.
Perfect. That's a great one.
He's great. Have you had Rico or Lisa De La Vega on?
We have not yet, and that's also they would also be great. Yeah. And then Tyler, do the last.
So basically, we are going to go one at a time, and we're going to take something that we think was particularly important to highlight, a takeaway point from the episode. It could be anything anybody said. Actually, one of the things that I think resonated with me the most was when we were talking about how magicians want to lecture. I didn't actually get to get this point across before the conversation progressed, but what I sort of took from it was this idea of like, when you first start doing magic, you see a magician do a trick and you're like, I want to be that. And you have this feeling of amazement and like, whoa, this is very special. You don't get to see very many magicians. But then you go to the magic store and all you see is magic, magic, magic all day, all the time. You're hanging out with the magicians all over the place. And then you go to a lecture and you get to have that's your show. Right? Like the lecture is a magic show for magicians.
Right.
So you get this feeling of wonder and amazement and like, whoa, I get to share. And these people are interested and engaged. And he's talking about it from all the angles at which I find it interesting. And then immediately that's now what you want to be, even though you may or may not be ready to be that person. Jonah, what about you?
I would say one of the most important parts of this was I think that you hit on the head exactly my feelings in a more clearer language about creativity and magic, because it's something that I've always struggled with getting across, which is, and both in the banana bandana and when we were talking about earlier creativity, which is like, if you're new and if your goal is to perform, just start doing the thing. Like, is the real separation between if this is your first time or if you're new, just start doing the thing. And then the real separation to say some venues, some locations, some situations really lend to you having to be original in the sense of it's the only way you're going to get the gig. It's the only way you're going to keep the gig. It's the only way people are going to be interested in you, and so on and so on and so on. And some don't require that. And some levels of your magic, I'd expect if you're doing this for 50 years, that something in that routine on the 50th year is different than it was on year one when you bought it. I'd like to hope. And same as if you're planning on performing for the best or the biggest stage in the world, then you do have to fight for creativity. But that's sort of what the journey. So I thought that illumination of how to interpret and intuit creativity was, or in originality rather, was a super valuable point. Karl, what about you? What was something that you thought was particularly important or particularly special for people to take home with them from this episode?
Yeah, I think what you just kind of started, but I think it's, again, the bigger picture of it. So, like you just said, starting doing the thing, just get out there and do it. Like experience is the thing you have to do, right? But then as you're doing it, you have to be evaluating, is this the right thing to be doing? Can I do it better? How do I do it better?
Sharpening that saw.
Yeah, because we all know magicians that have been doing magic for 50 years that are still horrible.
For sure.
Right? It's not just practice alone, that you have to actually get out there and do it and do it and do it and constantly be sharpening that saw, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll end with one of the things that I think that ties into what you just said, especially in terms of like magic lectures. One of the biggest problems I see is that you see something at a lecture and you go, oh, that was amazing, without realizing that you're not that lecturer. Your audiences aren't magic audiences, and the venues you perform in isn't the venue that you'd ever perform that trick in.
Right. So the question is, you watch it and you say, who was that amazing for? Was that amazing for you as a magician in an audience of other magicians? Because when you do it, it's going to be, you're the only magician, and it's not in the back of a magic store, and so on and so on and so on, and everything is different. And
just making sure you realize how those three things relate to that specific experience that you just had before you just go off and do that specific routine, expecting it to kill your audiences, and oftentimes it goes
exactly.
wah, 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 wah.
That is awesome. And with that, I want to give you a big, huge thank you for joining us on this episode that was super valuable. And most importantly, one of the things that is important to me is to give the advice that's required to just get people right off their feet and starting. So I think that is exactly what we wanted to hear. And a big, huge thank you for joining us. And a thank you for everybody who listened in and learned something. And we will see you all next Thursday.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Peace. Well, there you go. I hope you liked it, episode 126. If you like this kind of thing, if maybe this is the first podcast you've listened to, or the third or the 19th, and you don't know where to find us, you can find us on iTunes, on Google, Apple Play, on the Google Store, anywhere that you find podcasts, you find us. We're on Spotify, or as always, you can go to discourseinmagic.com, and there's some extra goodies there for you if you love magic. Otherwise, thank you so much, and we will see you next Thursday. Peace!